Chris, obviously delighted to introduce you today, and it makes a bit of a change actually to have you in the hot seat. So obviously this topic around elevating your business through podcasting is a very big one, especially at the moment. And so I've just lost my, sorry, bear me a second. There we go. Hopefully that's coming up correctly. Let me just move this out of the way. Sorry about this. I haven't got the positioning right here. So there we go. Yes, so what would be, let me just, sorry about this. Let me rescale this whole window. So there we go. And I'll be able to see what I'm doing, which probably helps a little bit. Yes, so what would be really good is if you could very kindly indicate what you're really passionate about, why you do it, and how you like to make a difference. And also be bold with your questions as they come up. What I'd very much like to do at this point is to introduce Chris properly. I was very fortunate I got to know Chris about, I think it was about 3 years ago, Chris, wasn't it, when we first met?
Something like that. It seems a long time, Rupert.
Yeah.
I can't remember 3, but it might be. I can't remember. I have no idea.
I've known
you for most of my life.
Where it's a compliment or an insult, I'll take it as a compliment. So, but one of the great things I know about Chris is not only has he become a good friend and someone I greatly admire and respect, but he's got an excellent reputation for his podcasts, which you've done in association with Voice America for, is it almost 10 years now, Chris, and 400 shows later. The other thing is, of course, through a change of direction a few years ago, which obviously I'd love to ask you a little bit more about. The great thing is you've been helping many hundreds of business leaders or owners over the last few years as well. And of course, this whole expertise and knowledge you've got is obviously phenomenal, which a lot of people would almost die for. But I think what would be really good is if you could also just introduce yourselves a little bit more, Chris, and share a bit about your background and why you made the shift of direction and what you're really passionate about, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, sure. My background, Rupert and Muriel, and obviously Renato and Pradeep here today as well. My background was corporate, and I worked with big companies like Mars and United Biscuits and Punch to board level. I worked in sales, marketing, procurement, HR, training, logistics, lots of different areas. And I set up a procurement consultancy, and I grew that to about 3 million turnover in just over 3 years with some partners, and was a very profitable business. But I realized my passion was people. And I made a huge call. I just had my first, wife and I had our first child, Matthew, and we decided that it would be I decided that I wanted to leave this successful company. I had a little bit of an ethics, values issue with one of my colleagues, difference, and decided I wanted to spend time helping leaders to develop their businesses through their people. So I've been doing that now for, crikey, maybe 14, 15 years since I set up. And early on during that period, I did lots of sort of self-assessment and work, and I started to learn to become a speaker. And I realized that my passion was about helping people to realize their potential. So when I was 40, I set a goal that I wanted to help over 1 million people beyond my client base. I got no idea how. It just seemed huge, but I'd set some big goals at 28, and for some reason those had materialized. So I set this big goal, and Voice America contacted me and said, would you be interested in having a show on our platform? Because we like the sound of your English accent, which all sounded really, really flattering. And then I found out that I had to pay them and not the other way around. So it wasn't quite so flattering. But 10 years ago, I was in conversations with them, and I've hosted my show now since September 2011. It sits complementary with my work with organizations and helping them sort of elevate and step up. But it's created an incredible network around the globe, and the wisdom and knowledge and the people I get to speak to is quite astonishing sometimes. I have to pinch myself sometimes when I'm talking to somebody who's run the space station or something like that, and think, can this be real? And what's more, because I've done 400 shows, they want to talk to me too. So
yeah, that's
good.
That's quite something, isn't it, really? And I suppose what's really good about what you do with Voice America is that you do the show once, but it's amplified out through multiple platforms all simultaneously, isn't it? So they do it's obviously, I think you've made quite a considerable investment over the last 10 years or so in it, haven't you? But on the other hand, for you, it's worked very well. So we're sort of it's great to be able to have Chris in the hot seat sharing his knowledge and expertise in this particular area, which I'm sure everyone here would agree. But I think what would be really good as well, because I think we spoke last week, Chris, and we off air, and we talked about, about why do a podcast and why you might have your own. But one of the things I think we came back to was it's one of these things you shouldn't really do if you're not 100% clear how you want to make a difference, because invariably, if you start to do something, if you won't persevere with it, you'll quit. And of course, it then means all the effort's sort of wasted. But why particularly podcasts? You obviously got this great thing about reaching a very large number of people. But what behind the scenes, how do you really want to make a difference, Chris?
I think for me, because my purpose in life is about helping people realize the potential, I realized that was limited with the people I could directly support in terms of my clients. So, and I also realized that I love to communicate, and that's a real passion for me. And I would say to people, if they were considering whether to do podcasting, to do something that you love. If you love blogging or you love writing, then blog or write. Don't do a podcast because it's a lot of work. You've got to enjoy having a conversation and be really curious and interested in people. And I'm very curious and very interested in people. So for me, it was a slightly nervy thing to do. My show's a little bit different. It does go live on the internet. So it goes live at a specific time, and then it goes into podcast formats onto Spotify and all the different channels, iHeartRadio, which is why it's picked up in over 50 countries every month, and we had over 300,000 different IPs access, an average of 8 times last year. So I'm doing something right. We were the most listened to show on the network last year.
Yeah. That's quite something, actually, isn't it? So, because you're one of the oldest broadcasters on the platform, aren't you?
I am. Yeah, I'm 102 this year.
You've aged very well, or not, as the case might be. But
with children, I occasionally feel that. I don't know how old I am in terms of the duration of doing this. I would guess there's not many people who've been doing this for the length of time that I have, and certainly not in the UK. So I'm quite enduring in terms of my long-term nature of this. But I do feel with podcasting, if you're going to do it, it takes time, and it takes a lot of energy and a lot of effort. Mine was quite a noble reason for starting it, but I got 18 months into it, and I realized that I'm spending a lot of money on this. I'm spending a lot of time and opportunity costs when I could be picking up the phone and speaking to potential clients. And for me, there was a point at 18 months where I had to question what I was doing and the sanity of it, because you can't keep plowing money and time into something and not generating a return. But what I learned was that what happened, I spoke to a guy who was called Peter Roper, and Peter was the national president, I think, of the Professional Speaking Association at the time. And I asked Peter about whether his views on whether I should continue or keep going. And he said, do you realize all the people out around the Speaking Association, the people I connect with, are talking so highly of you. The benefit is going to come back to you at some point soon. And within about 6 weeks, I'd interviewed somebody, and it led to a £100,000 contract. So suddenly it didn't matter anymore. Suddenly I could be more playful with it and keep on, moving it forward. But I would say it's a bit like a dog. It's not, if you're going to do a podcast, it's not for Christmas. You need to be in it for the long term, and through the thick and thin, and then ultimately you will start to see the benefits. then
Yeah.
it will kind of elevate. It will improve over time and deepen.
Yeah. No, nice. So that I'd just say really it is a bit of an investment, isn't it? Well, a massive time investment. And what would you say in relation to that, in terms of the actual time and cost that it takes? If you were to look at the amount of time, I mean, you've got it round to a T now, haven't you? Because you got so used to doing this every week, week in, week out. But if you actually look at all the time you put into it, both in the preparation, speaking to your VA to help you with it, preparing the guests, all this type of stuff, much time would you say you're spending per week on your weekly show?
I would say it's about a day a week of time, including the interview and pre-conversations and planning for shows. What I did is with Voice America is you basically buy the space really and the support. So I have an engineer, I have a senior producer whose surname is Trump, and she's related to him, which is quite interesting. And they basically manage everything for me. So the engineer, we turn up for the interview with me. I connect with the engineer and a guest somewhere in the world or guests via Zoom, and they handle all of the recording, the packaging. They put it all into the archives for you. They put it all into the different places like Spotify and all those sort of areas. So they do a lot of that work. But on top of that, there's a whole lot of work which is around marketing, liaising with guests, writing up show descriptions, letting the station know who you're going to interview, and writing the copy, maybe press releases. So I have an assistant who helps me do all of that, and my aim therefore is that I just purely do the pre-interview, do the interview and the prep around the interview that only I can do, and then she does the rest and the marketing of the show on social media. Because you could spend 2 or 3 days on this a week if you're not careful. So having a system's really important. Yeah. There's other ways to do it. My way cost me some money. I don't think it's enormous, but probably with an assistant, it's going to be over 10K a year. I would say probably around that sort of mark, plus my time. You can do it cheaper, and you can there's places like Blog Talk Radio. There's an organization in the States called Podetize. They seem to have about 350 shows, and people send in the interviews, and they kind of help package it for them, create a blog for them. What I found is when I tried to create my own, I did 2 interviews in Turkey last year, and I went to meet the whirling dervishes, but through a connection, and interviewed all sorts of thought leaders and spiritual leaders and all sorts of people. And it took me, to narrate and pull those into 2 great shows took me about 10 hours of work. So it was quite a lot. Wow. Yeah. Normally I point and shoot and do it in one, but that was a bit different. I do it with the handheld. And
I think because Chris, if you don't mind me saying, and I speak very openly here about this, you're what I regard as being the ultimate professional in this particular space, and also everything has got to be exactly right. Would you say it's also because you've got this great attention for detail and you care passionately about getting it right? You perhaps spending a little bit more on it than you feel you should as a matter of interest, or do you feel what you're saying here is realistic normally?
What I do, I just think what I have various conversations. One of the things I would always recommend with people is you take the opportunity to have an introductory call with each of your guests, and there's a big amount of work actually selecting your guests. Because what I've realised is that the guest is actually, for me, more important than the listener, because those are the relationships that I really establish with amazing people, and that's where the opportunity generally comes from more often than the audience. So people often get there, they think it's all about the audience, but it isn't. It's if you think I've done 400 hours of interviews, I probably interviewed maybe 420 different people, and it's those relationships. So I always take the time to develop rapport, create a great impression. I will not script. I have a structure that I use for each interview, and I will identify a few questions that we can busk around. But besides that, there's some things that have got to be done. You've got to write the show description. You've got to take the bio of your guest. That's got to be uploaded up to wherever. And if you're doing all the technical elements, you've got to do that afterwards. Yeah, it sounds like a lot of hard work, but if you develop a system, then it can work for you. And I have, Rupert, I have generated return on investment on my show, and I would say now after 10 years, I think I just realised this year it's probably about £60,000 of my turnover will be that can directly relate to the show.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm pretty much a small one-man business, so it's a good proportion of my income. So it has come through doing this.
Yeah,
so I think this is the tip of the iceberg of what's to come now.
I think it's also presumably because you're repositioning yourself. Well, I mean, you're basically amplifying your brand. You're positioning yourself as being an expert. Not only is that good for attracting clients, but also people should be probably much more inclined to pay appropriately for your service provision generally now because of what you do. Would you say that's a fair question, fair point?
I don't think it hurts, and I think it doesn't hurt at all. And a lot of my clients do enjoy listening to the shows, and they do get a lot of information from it. What I would say particularly helpful, if you're an expert in your field, is if you utilize it to build your expertise in your field. So, I have conversations around elevating your business, building engagement, developing yourself as an individual, and growing your company. So all of that wisdom that's flowing from these experts that you'd normally go and see at a conference or something like that, pay a lot of money, that's coming to me. I get that information one hand, plus I get sometimes mentoring and from some of these people and who give me tips. Jack Canfield, if you know Jack, he wrote the cover quote for my book. Ivan Meisner, the founder of BNI, wrote the foreword. You don't only get access to these people through the podcast and through this medium. I have access to them.
Yeah, as you say, it's put you in a really good place, isn't it? As far as that's concerned,
it builds my knowledge to and the ability I'm able to, in terms of the contribution I'm able to make to my clients through all of this wisdom that I've assimilate through these conversations.
That sort of, obviously, we're talking quite a bit about brand benefits now, which is really interesting. What would you say some of the other benefits are, in addition to perhaps the amplification of your brand and presenting you as an expert? Do you personally, have you found yourself personally develop and grow quite a bit out of this through the connections you've had? And what are the most memorable interviews you've done?
Great. So I think the thing I've really noticed is my communication ability has improved, and ability to speak very clearly. I think that I had some skills in this week in, week out, and I'm getting the opportunity to speak to a good sized audience each week, which is really good, particularly as speakers are struggling to do that at the moment. So I think for myself, it's definitely elevated me. It's elevated my consciousness. The things I talk to with NASA physicists and all sorts. I mean, the last week I've spoken to somebody who did run the space station. I've spoken to somebody who's a film actress, but also is an ambassador for peace. I'm speaking to the founder tomorrow of TEDx, who's interested in something I'm developing, and has been introduced to me. I spoke to a lovely lady, Judy Robinette, who I think is one of the most connected people on the planet, and that's all been in a week. So those conversations, I think, elevate my thinking and my ability to add value. Other things I think I get, what I really kind of love is I've got some really cool friends, and my kids get to meet really cool people. So they've met adventurers, they've met endurance athletes. We've had a twice world champion to stay, rower. We've had a guy who rode 7,000 miles across the Pacific from Japan to San Francisco. All of these add amazing colour to your life. So I mentioned I got to meet the whirling dervishes, and in Turkey last year. This year I was supposed to go and interview as a guest of the mayor of Marrakesh and do an interview out of a hotel, very posh hotel where Churchill wrote his memoirs. So favorite interviews, what I could say, I mean, little moments. I remember Jack Canfield, who you may know from writing Chicken Soup for the Soul. There's 500 million copies written, and I said, 500 million copies have been sold globally for Chicken Soup for the Soul. And Jack, when I first got on the line with him, I did say to him, I said, got to be honest, Jack, I'm not really usually nervous doing these interviews, but I've read so many of your books over the years that I feel a little bit daunted by you. And he said, "Gee, Chris," he said, "don't worry about that." He said, "I feel the same way sometimes." And I said, when? And he said, when I'm talking to Obama. That was a favorite one. And then I've had other moments, I've had moments in interviews which I'll never forget. I had one where I had a guy on who, at the age of 29, his fairground business his name's Brian Main, actually. His fairground business had collapsed. He was brought up as a traveller. And he said, I couldn't read or write at 29. And then my his business collapsed, and he lost £1 million, I think it was, and he couldn't read or write, and now he's an amazing expert. And on the same interview, a lovely lady who then shared, because I asked them about when they first discovered goals, which was the topic, and she said, well, my dad killed himself, and he was West Indian. He came over to be in the RAF. He felt bullied. He killed himself, and then my mother was so upset. A year later, she killed herself too. I ended up on drugs, and I think I'm always just bowled over by people who've overcome amazing adversity. Lovely lady last week, Dr. Draven James. She's this amazing actress. She runs a hospital, still works full time, running a pharmacy function for 40 people. But she, when she was a child, she was homeless. Her father died at a young age. They lived partly on the streets, and she said to me, I used to walk a lot, before I went to school. She just had an unbelievable upbringing, and now she's got loads of work and loads of jobs because I don't think she wants to keep hold of them because of having had nothing as a young person. But I love those sorts of interviews. I love, people who've done amazing, unusual things. The saxophone player from Dire Straits was one of them, telling me about what it was like to be on stage at Live Aid in front of 3 billion people and dealing with difficult people like Mark Knopfler. That was good.
No, that's really interesting. I'm just going to take a slight break just for a second, actually, because I just want to pick up a few people made some kind of comments. Obviously, Renato, thank you very much as always. Pradeep, great to see you here. Those of you who are joining, because I can see the numbers go up and down here as we're on the interview now. Obviously, do introduce yourselves in the chat and say what you're really passionate about. Also, if someone's got a really good question they would love to ask Chris, do drop that into the into Facebook or YouTube chat. And what we'll do is we'll try and see whether we can pick one or two of you out. Just on that point, Muriel, if you could just make sure you got the link to this behind the scenes ready if we need to drop that into the chat window so people can come into the green room. I think Muriel can still hear us. But yeah, do interact. We like these to be lively discussions. And everyone wins out of that as well. So I think we sort of talked a little bit about some of the benefits, some of the amazing people you've sort of interviewed. I must admit, I've found even since doing these live streams, which obviously you and I started doing in March this year, the amazing people that's led to speaking to one way or another has been absolutely phenomenal. And I'm not going to share it just yet, but we've got quite a special guest. Also, we've got some really good guests coming in January, but also there's another very special guest coming in February. And he's got an amazing story, but also run a very successful business as well. But I'll reveal a little bit more about that probably after Christmas. So, but I've just feel very humbled at times. I'm sure, Chris, you have as well some of the experiences you've had through speaking with people. And I think it actually elevates. I mean, certainly I don't know about you, but since doing these, even since March, I've found a lot more confidence in myself. So I think it's probably helped because Chris, you're very naturally supportive behind the scenes, and also lots of people who've injected, like several people on today as well. It's been really good. But I think what would be really nice to talk about as well, we talked about a little bit about the work you have to do to prepare for the shows. Is you talk about the importance of a plan as well, don't you? And obviously, in your case, we particularly talk about Voice America. But what would you say generally are the things that people need to put in place if they're not going Voice America, but they want to generally do podcasting? What tips have you got around that?
Yeah, well, I think you've got to think firstly, sort of why might I do this, and am I prepared? Is this just an idea because other people are doing it? And there's 550,000 podcasts, I believe. It's become huge. So it's quite a busy sort of marketplace, really. You've got to think about why do I really want to do this, and is it a noble reason, or is it about making money, which can still be a noble reason as long as you're adding value, because it's directly it's quite hard work to make good money out of a podcast directly. But I think you've got to think about why do I want to do this? You've got to think about what might the branding look like? What is the unique angle? Mine's the business elevation show, and it's that sort of little bit of information there. But that's what that does is it gives me quite a bit of breadth to be able to talk about, to have a former world champion boxer or somebody talking about teams. I've got the breadth to have different people. It's not too narrow. So you might want to decide if you're going to have a narrow niche, and then it might be a series that you do for maybe 20, 30 episodes. Or if you're going to have something that's very long living, then you may want to extend that over, have a broader subject to enable you to capture it. You need some, to develop the look of it. Mine's got jingles in it. It's got, we've got a lovely Adrienne Lawler, who was a Sky newsreader and BBC newsreader, did the sort of commentary on mine, and a wonderful musician actually who I met through the show created some of the music.
Oh, wow.
So you've got to think about the packaging, Owen O'Sullivan. You've got to think about the packaging of it. You then need to just be mindful. I think it's helpful to have a plan initially to understand, each week we need to promote this. We've got to find the guests. My top tip on finding guests is that when you've had a great interview with someone, you've had great rapport with them, ask them who else they know who would be a great guest on your show. And that's when you often get the special guests. I always give very high priority to my guests. That's where most of my guests come from, because they will recommend super people, then introduce you. So that's rather than the PR agencies who kind of bombard, or the podcasting companies who bombard. So you've got to think about the look of it, the feel of it. How frequently are you going to do it? Is it weekly? Some people are doing them daily in America, or are you going to do them 2 weekly or monthly? Mine is weekly. The length of it, a top tip here, the average listening on Voice America to a podcast show is about 23 minutes.
Right.
I'm contracted to do an hour, so mine's quite a bit longer. But if you did, 23, 30 minutes, something like that, you would be, kind of on the money around the length of time people will listen in one sitting typically. Mine, they kind of, more sort of take away and study, and maybe sometimes listen to in chunks.
Yeah. Can I just pick something said around that as well, actually, because funny enough, I was having this conversation with someone this morning, because the Voice America is quite interesting, the format there, because is it about every 20 minutes they have a bit of a commercial break?
Yes, but however, I can specify how many I want in the show. When I first did it, I thought I had to have 3, and then I realized I could have 2, and sometimes I'll just have 1. And I have on 1 or 2 occasions, I had none at all. So I do have that flexibility. What is nice with the commercial breaks to give you time to have a chat with your guest and just readjust, and sometimes you learn things off audio that you can then share in the next sort of segment. Yeah,
I suppose the reason I was asking particularly about that, you mentioned the average time on Voice America is 23 minutes. Is that, do people forgetting about yourself for a moment, with other people, do they typically have breaks every 20 minutes in the show, or is that just the reason I'm asking that question, is because in a sense, if there's a commercial break, I would expect to lose a number of people along the way, because you got into flow, and then you've got to then try and get the audience back again. And if they may just tune out at that stage. So I just wondered whether that was impacting the amount of time, because I'd heard, whether this is correct or not, the optimum time is 30 to 40 minutes. But challenge me if you feel that's wrong, because I'm only going by what I've heard. But what's your impression on that?
I think 30 to 40 minutes is a good length of time. The thing, though, what you have to do as the host is you've got to give those people reasons to come back. So what I'm always doing is I will sort of summarize a little bit after each segment, and I'll tell them, actually, stay on, because after the break we're really going to get into nitty gritty. You're going to learn 5 key points that are absolutely going to transform your well-being, or something like that, and then you create that hook to move into the next session. I've got the most amazing story that you're going to hear after the break. The other thing, I suppose, with the breaks, people can go and get a cup of tea and come back if they want to. The other thing I would say, though, Rupert, is that with my show, just go out live. So it's a little bit different. It goes out in one take live, but people will listen to them afterwards. As in podcast form, you can just fast forward through the break if they want to.
True.
And only a few % of people ever listen to them live. The vast majority listen to them afterwards.
Yeah. It's interesting as well because obviously live clearly you can't speed things up. With Voice America, I think if I've got this correct, you can actually turn the speed up that you hear people listen to guests as well, isn't it? Because I don't know about, perhaps it's just me being a patient little git, I can say about myself clearly, but quite often when I listen to things afterwards, I'll perhaps turn the speed up by 1.5 times, for example, because my attention span is that of a gnat, so I have to keep my brain really stretched all the time. In other cases, it's a very technical conversation, I have to slow it down. But is there some evidence that you found, because I think the platform's quite flexible, it does allow you to adjust the playback speed, doesn't it? But have you found?
I think so. There's quite a bit you can do in there. I think it probably does.
So do you find a lot of the time people do tend to actually adjust the speed of those interviews very much, or you don't know?
First time I've ever had the conversation, Rupert.
Well, there's always one. Someone comes up with one difficult question just to throw a curveball.
So I don't know his answer.
Well, at least that's an honest response. What you mean is, don't be so blinking stupid, Rupert. You should have asked that question in the first place.
Good question. That is a good question. Some people do that with, I think, with Audible and things. You can turn the speed up as well.
Yeah.
That can be helpful.
Yeah.
So,
no, exactly. It's about keeping people engaged in whatever way you can do, isn't it? And obviously, we talked about the planning side. I think I interrupted you part of the way through your flow. What other points would you say about the planning side to actually end up with a good show?
So plan them. Think about the type of guests that you want to have on the show, and what I've learned from my experience is that the best guests are potentially those that you could maybe develop a good relationship and have some synergy, maybe even do some work for in the future. So I say focusing on the guest more than the audience, because if you want to gain some value from this, and then use this as an opportunity to get to know people that you want to meet with. Mm-hmm. It's a lovely way to go and offer them something for free. They're not paying for it. You're doing that. You're doing the planning. But doing that, if you give them a great experience of you, then you will connect, and with some of those people, you will do good, some business and so on. And together, and I've got lifelong friends now through having done the, all over the world as a consequence of doing the show. So I can reach out to lots of different people, lots of different experts. Yeah. And so think about the type of guest. That's really important. Think about, obviously, how you describe the show. You may decide whether you're going to write a blog about it. After the show, you might want to get it transcribed. Possibly, you could do that. And you might want to share some points. Because we do so many, actually, we kind of struggle a bit to keep up with the blogging every show. So that's something that's not been highly developed from my side. I'm not sort of great at that, but I say we do a very high listenership, so that's good, and we're starting to build lots more engagement as well, which is good too. Structure of the show, have a think what you want to do initially. You want to introduce your guest in a very engaging way. You probably want to make sure that you say a little bit about you, say anything about me and what I do as a company. Introduce the topic. But when your first questions are really about connecting that guest with the audience. So, if you've got some amazing individual, they may be hard for the audience to connect with. So you've got to help them understand that this person's human like you, warts and all, been through problems, been through challenges. So connect with the guest, define the subject. So, if it's what I do, because it's one of my sort of pet word, elevating leadership. You might describe what elevating leadership is. Last week it was everyday peace, so you would describe what that is to the audience. What are the problems that when everyday peace isn't existing in your life, and then what's maybe 4 or 5 key points that you can talk about that subject and I often get the guests to overview those, and I will go back and ask questions about them. Then towards the back end of the interview, it's more around kind of summarizing those about what could the audience do next, and also giving them contact details as well. Final question I always ask is, what's your final message?
Nice.
Always a good one that you'd like to leave us with. That's always my last one. So,
yeah, lovely. That's really good. And you mentioned about repurposing as well. And I seem to remember when we spoke about this about 4 or 6 weeks ago, you were trying to go through the mammoth task of actually going through your interviews and seeing whether you could possibly repurpose some of that and create an index around it as well, weren't you?
yeah.
Yeah. Well, how's that all progressed? Because obviously you've got a quite big problem then, because even for us, I think we're on show 38 now, so only 1/10 of what you've managed to achieve. But just actually going through what we're doing and looking at how we can edit it down and repurpose it and redistribute it. What tips have you got around that as well to try and make that task a little bit easier? And how far have you personally get with that, bearing in mind the size of the task you've got?
Yeah. So I've got, every one of mine's about 15 pages of A4 when it's transcribed. And then when you transcribe them, if you use something like Otter, they're fairly nonsense because we talk around in circles. If you transcribe this conversation, it wouldn't be an easy flowing conversation without you then editing it. So that takes time as well. I've got a list of all my shows and all of my guests and their contact details and things like that. We have been transcribing some of the shows. What I'm starting to do is focus on the ones that are particularly relevant to my work, and we're starting to pull out some of those golden nuggets. It is like now it's like painting the Golden Gate Bridge or something like that. It is a very, very big exercise, and maybe would have been better handled as we went along. However, it wasn't my day job. If you see what I mean, it was this wonderful hobby which is now funneled into my work. What I'm starting to do is actually starting to pull groups of people together into an amazing space, but they're show guests. So that's the network I've been focusing on more than actually the end audience, and I think that's where some of the gold is starting to come from. In terms of, I want to help the world to become, leaders to become better and elevate their performance in this world and make a bigger contribution to the world's problems. So by pulling the guests together, they have enormous networks, make a big contribution, are quite key individuals in their own right. So some of those individuals, and probably slightly more on the kind of spiritual bent and slightly as well, I'm finding, but pulling those people together is where the development is going to occur next year. And I'm quite excited about it. I'm talking to some very interesting people at the moment about it. So I think over time you realize how to utilize some of this, that it's never going to, can be an exhaustive supply of content, but you've got to get kind of focused with it. We may ultimately, if we ever got some capital investment, then we do a lot more with it.
Right. Yeah.
I've got the archive. I own it. So I have that intellectual property, so I can do what I want with it.
And I think to make your task a bit easier, you've been involving a VA, a virtual assistant, with this as well, haven't you?
She's focused on it. She's focusing on the show. That's her job.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah. Good. No, that's
marketing, the social media, some of the blog posts. We may get a company to create some of these blog posts. Actually, we're in conversation about that.
Yeah, no, good. That's very good. I'll just pick on a few things that people have very kindly shared. Obviously, I think basically Pradeep's raised a really interesting question here. Do you have a particular method that works for you for reaching out to people who you want to be on the show? Yes, so you've obviously given some tips about people you've just interviewed, whether they could recommend 2 or 3 other people they've got a massive respect for, who could be great guests on the show. Have you got some other tips for bringing guests as well?
So when you start out, so I did a 12-week trial initially, which is the Voice America approach, and what I did is I thought about who are 12 amazing people that I knew in my network. So I went out to these amazing people and brought them in initially, and I did 12 interviews with them, and I worked very hard to do them as well as I possibly could. And then that was them. Then that was my base then to then ask them for guests. And if on average everybody maybe surprise you with 1.2 guests or something like that, and then it kind of builds from there. Today, if you established, there are lots of PR agencies and a lot of podcasting companies you'll have seen this probably. Do you want to go on a virtual world speaking tour? Is one of the and these individuals basically bombard people like me with guests. So our biggest challenge these days generally is sorting out the real high caliber from all of the requests that we get, and of course the audience sometimes will request, because it's important to keep the standard of the show really high and building all the time, because then when people look at that guest list, it attracts them to be guests too. But there's nothing like having somebody recommend you.
Yeah, that makes a lot, doesn't it? Because it makes it so much easier. And as a matter of interest, with the show themselves, because I think if I'm correct saying with Voice America, they can measure viewings more by a number of IP addresses. Is that correct? Yeah. Which obviously is a bit of a crude guide. You've got a similar problem with a podcast generally, in the sense you don't always know the size of the audience. But hasn't there been some research to actually suggest, and I think this is probably replicates what's happening in real podcasts, so it equally, things like today, the live streams, we tend to find a lot of people watch these things afterwards as well. But do you find on Voice America typically that it might be only perhaps 10% of people actually listen to these things live? Perhaps the other 80 or 90% are the people who actually listen to something afterwards? Or
2%.
Sorry?
2%.
Or 2% live?
Yeah.
Wow. So 98% is afterwards.
Typical across. So what happens with mine too is that the archive's out there. This is the beautiful thing about them, is once the archive is there, people are, for months, if not years, are still going into that archive. The lovely thing with mine is people can embed them on the website too, on their own websites too. So people go into those and listen. But overall, it's about 2%. It's quite small. I might on my podcast, I might have a low is 40. I think the most I probably ever had has been Jack Canfield. I know was 300. I had a lady last year. I looked at her numbers. She was about 56 live. By the end of the day, though, we were at 1,100 with her when I tracked it. So she was her daughter was the CEO of YouTube, and her other daughter was amazing too. And she did something about bringing up amazing people. So it does accelerate from there, really.
Wow, that's really interesting. And I think it's probably a bit of a message there as well, as if people start doing this, when they start doing it, is to play the long game with this, isn't it? Because if you go by the vanity of numbers, you'd very quickly just get disillusioned and just quit, wouldn't you? It's the fact that you, through the test of time, through 9-10 years of doing it, you've just been there consistently, week in, week out. Even when you've been at the top of a mountain, on one occasion, I think you had to record it or something, but one way or another, you've actually kept those shows going week in, week out. So you've become almost like a pillar of the establishment, haven't you, as far as this is concerned? But it's that consistency and the clarity of message and the guests you bring in, presumably has really helped you to develop what you've created today. Would that be fair to say? People
are very impressed when you've been going for nine years. Into 10 years, there's few people aren't, because they know that you're somebody, you're not a quitter. You'll keep on, you keep on going. You developed a strategy and you keep on working with it. And I must admit, most years I kind of review whether I'm going to continue it or not, and review the value of it. I'm pleased. I'm pleased I'm still doing it though. And there's a lot of people out there that when you're doing this, you're giving to, and I give. I fund. It costs me a couple of £100 a show. But I'm spending the time with somebody, and I'm giving, and eventually, then some people want to give to you, not everybody. And I think that you can call in those favors sometimes with people.
Yeah.
If you pick the right guests. So I'm looking for people who have got humility. I don't always go for the big stars, particularly if they're they're doing tons of these. They won't give it the attention, but I'm looking for amazing leading edge people, around the planet now, who actually it's a privilege, and they're proud and they're excited about being on.
Yeah, no, that's
a lot of years, I guess, to be in that situation where I've got that track record.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely great. And I think the sort of final question I got here, and then we've got a few little bits of information to share. And of course, I've got one last question for you, of course, Chris, as you would expect. So I have been listening. If that might seem strange, I have been listening. Question here really is how can people get return on their investment?
Yeah. So
would you place? And yeah, how long should people give it? I know where it's being successful.
Well, I think you've got to look at the tangible financials and also the intangibles, like your network and how that's developing and growing. I got a publishing deal with Penguin Random House within 3 weeks at one stage. I wouldn't have got that if I hadn't got the radio show. So I think you have to look at those things. You have to look at what it adds to the quality of your life. For me, I do mine on a Friday. I get a lift every Friday when I'm doing this, and I go away, my mind's just buzzing with thoughts and ideas, and that for energetically for me, it's really good to help me keep my energy and keep my my kind of thinking moving. That you can gain sponsorship. I had some sponsorship revenue this year. You can gain product endorsements. It is a bit manual and tedious finding sponsors. And what they do is often compare against commercial radio stations. And I had an island once in the Caribbean that we're looking at sponsoring, and it became like pulling teeth in the end, and it kind of got abandoned. You could crowdfund. You could ask for, in response for some merchandise and things. You could ask for money if you need it. There are ways to ask for donations and tips. I think you'll find somewhere between maybe 0% and 3% of listeners will actually do this. You can repackage your content into golden nuggets, turn them into books. My book, The Power to Get Things Done Whether You Feel Like It or Not, the nuggets came from the research from the show. A lot of when I'm running programs on leadership and I'm working with companies, a lot of the ideas are coming from what I've learned through the show, and that's becoming part of my intellectual property. You can develop programs, possibly I'm doing with guests. You could sell tickets to live events. You could develop merchandise. You can obviously use it to enhance your social media, and you can interview clients who potentially you could work with. Nice.
There's some really good tips there. So those of you joining us today, I'd actually listen to back on the recording of this afterwards and pick some of those out, because I think it's some real golden nuggets with all that, Chris. So thank you very much. We'll return back to you in just a moment if that's all right. At this point, so let's make sure I can see my screen again. So just spare me a second. So what have I done here? Right, there we go. So just, and let me bring Muriel in as well. So ready, Muriel, so there we go, got you back on stream. Now next week, we've got the Christmas special. This will be the last show of this year. It's next Thursday. There isn't a networking collaboration event next week at 4 o'clock, so this starts just before 5 o'clock. And it's going to be very free flow format. But some of the areas we'll also look at, along with our glass of mulled wine and mince pies, is some of the biggest challenges that perhaps people have faced this year. A little bit of a review. We're not going to spend too long on that, because I think we just want to focus on what's next, as it were. So what we see between us as some of the threats and opportunities for next year, and what we feel as a part of the show is what sectors we feel are going to do best, and what people should consider doing in terms of what their business model should actually look like for next year as well. So it should be a good, fun interview. It should be very lively, and so do feel you can join in. And equally, if you've got other people you'd like to invite, please do so. Moving on from there, in terms of just a quick reminder for those of you who are new to this, the live streams are every Thursday just before 5 o'clock GMT. We will be restarting networking collaboration sessions which will be recommencing on the 14th of January. That's moving to a monthly format. So live streams will continue weekly. The networking collaboration shows are moving to a monthly format. And now we have updated our ticketing system for this, but I know there's a little bit of confusion the way the reminders are being sent out. So we're just trying to discuss with our providers for the calendar system of how we can get around this. It's either a case that we're going to have to try and do it as 2 separate tickets in future, or we're going to see whether we can amend what we've got to make it a little bit more intelligent. So obviously, if you get a reminder for the 4 o'clock one, even though I've changed the wording, just bear in mind we're recommencing those on the 14th of January. And the 5 o'clock sessions obviously will stand apart from, as you'd expect, on Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve. There will be, I think we'll give Chris a session off of good, 2 sessions off the good behaviour, and Muriel might give me those 2 as well. So just bear that in mind. And then in terms of the mini conference, as you know, we started moving these to a monthly format as from November. A little bit of a different emphasis next time round, and it's going to be about amplifying your brand, bringing your sales forward, and leveraging technology to give you your time back. And there'll be a little, obviously, as you'd expect, we're sharing some more market insights and quite a bit of bonus content around LinkedIn. We've got some really exciting things to discuss with people in January. Now, obviously, some of the content will be very similar. If you've rejoined us from a previous mini conference, probably half the content will be very similar to what you've heard before. So bear that in mind. However, there's also going to be some real new nuggets, golden nuggets in there as well. We're going to be sharing some really exciting things. Ironically enough, it ties in very well with what Chris has very kindly shared today, because it's about being able to do the job once and being able to repurpose things multiple times, but crucially about really how to leverage what you're doing so you can considerably amplify all the efforts you're putting in place. So just bear that in mind. That's going to be on the next one's going to be on the 5th of January, and you can register on that now on our website. And a quick reminder as well, for those of you who are coming here for the first time, from the homepage of the website, you can register for these regular live streams. You can also register for a just-in-time webinar, and also for the mini conference and also the live streams. And clearly, we're here for you. We 100% understand that it can be a very lonely journey. It's been a pretty tough year for so many businesses, and unfortunately, we're not through the worst yet. But hopefully, with what's going on out there at this present time, there is a little bit of hope for next year. And clearly, some businesses have benefited greatly by what's going on at the moment. Equally, others have struggled. We are here to support you and in that business journey and that business growth. And that's why Chris and I spoke in March this year with a view to setting these live streams up, and very grateful for Chris's support. You can also set a reminder in Facebook and in YouTube. If you hit the subscribe button and hit the reminder button in YouTube, do feel free to share this with your friends. It'd be really appreciated. And obviously, thank you very much for joining us today. Now, obviously, a few sort of tips. I'd just like to get a little bit of feedback as well. So any of you, yes, I think Ian sort of mentioned that it's been a bit of a disaster. Ian, perhaps just give us a little bit of a reminder of the sector you're in as well. It'd be really good to understand. I think it is a case, just on that particular point, I think the businesses which have been able to adapt have obviously will be in a much stronger place moving forwards. I think what's actually happened, it probably is accelerated in many cases what would have happened over 5 or 10 years anyway. But the difficulty, of course, is the events and hospitality, obviously travel and so on, have been very badly impacted, and clearly it's going to be some time. But there are also opportunities as well. So obviously we're keen to explore that with people. But Muriel, what thoughts have you got today from what Chris has very kindly shared in terms of some insights?
Well, I found it really, really interesting, and I hadn't realised that the interesting people that you've been in contact with and interview, and famous people.
Yeah.
Lots of them.
Yeah.
the only things I can brag about is I have met Bobby from EastEnders, and I've also met Anthony Joshua, who gave me a big hug, the famous boxer, of course. But that's it. So no comparison to you, I'm afraid.
Yes, yeah.
Well, I think a lot of people I interview, they're not a level, A-list celebrities or anything like that, but they're just in their own fields. They develop real expertise, and some from different countries happen to have done great sporting achievements and things like that. But what I do find is that generally everybody's extremely nice. Those people who've been through hardship and achieved something, and then a lot of them, I would say, it was quite interesting. I wondered with people who really got very high levels of attainment, were they real kind of geniuses? And I've only really met out of all the interviews I've done, maybe 3 or 4 people I've thought were absolute geniuses. They got something intellectually above and beyond everybody else. Most people have just had a dream, and they've worked hard to overcome obstacles, and
quite often they've had a really hard background, haven't they? I mean, Sir Marco Robinson was a classic, and we've also had another couple of speakers, haven't we, who had it really tough from the beginning, but have made a huge success with their lives and their businesses.
Yeah, and Jessica Richards is an interesting one as well, isn't she? I remember she'd got one hell of a story as well as being an amazing woman. So, we've had some really interesting guests on this show. So, I personally, first of all, really enjoyed this interview, Chris. Your insights and knowledge in this particular space goes without question. As you'd expect me to ask, what is the one key thing you feel the key message you would like to very much share with everyone today?
I would say that if you're prepared, it is the most wonderful thing to do. I absolutely love it. And for me, just that opportunity to talk to amazing people and to learn from them, to explore with them, in some cases to befriend them, hear their stories. I think it's absolutely wonderful, and the wisdom that you acquire from it. And I think, so I would say, if you're interested in this, in communication, and you're interested in a way to reach out and connect with people, and learn and share and help, it's a brilliant thing to do. However, if for you it's all about making a quick buck out of it, don't do it. And you've got to learn to love it. Really, that's what I would say. Otherwise, if you love writing, you don't need to necessarily do a podcast. Write or write a blog, and maybe bring people up, talk to them for content for your blog. Find what you love doing, and then go and do it as your marketing angle. Really, I think it's probably the.
Yeah, no, lovely. Thank you very much. Well, those of you who join us on the 5th of January, actually, I think what you'll find is a lot of what we're sharing here, or Chris very kindly shared, is very complementary to that. And Chris and I are having a little bit of a catch up about this next week, and a whole host of ideas that Chris has got too. So really looking forward to that. Anyway, on that note, I want to just say thank you very much to everyone who've joined us for today. And we'll look forward to seeing you next week, just before 5 o'clock, when we sort of kick off. Remember that funny hat, the mince pies and the mulled wine, it's obligatory for the next session. So we're going to have a good, fun session. If you want to invite any guests along, just do it. And we will look forward to seeing you next Thursday at just before 5 o'clock GMT. Take care, everyone. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye.